What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here of the Nolecast, back again with another Nolecast episode. Excited to be doing this one. Got a lot of fun topics to talk about here in Orlando. FSU rolled through for the booster stop, and got to see Tony White and Malzahn and Norvell and all those guys, and that was great. And maybe a little basketball chatter, but today I want to start with something really exciting, and that is legendary home loans. Chad does such an awesome job. More than 500 Nolecast listeners have decided to get their home loan through Chad. I know I've done it twice. It's awesome. I know Graham has used Chad as well. Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas all licensed up there too. So, hey, can 500 Nolecast listeners be wrong? I mean, I guess in theory it's possible, but we've had so many positive experiences, great feedback from our listeners who have decided to use the legendary team. 844-FSU loan, 844-FSU loan is the number to call, or just hit the link there in the show notes. Anyway, I wanted to start today with a real exciting topic, and that is an FSU baseball team that's like really, really pretty damn good. And, we talk mostly football on this show, so you can skip ahead a couple times if you don't feel like listening to some baseball talk. But y'all, I would encourage you to sit and listen to at least a little bit of this baseball talk, because, I mean, this team is good, man. They beat the crap out of JMU over the weekend. They already started the year as a top 10 team. They're moving up in the rankings. And I think this says something, because you have so many teams, in the SEC and a couple in the Big 12 and whatnot who really care about college baseball. And Link Jarrett has his team playing. I mean, it's 4 games. I get it. They beat USF last night. But, I mean, guys, this is a good baseball team. They pitch really well. They pick up the baseball pretty well. The hitting, Jarrett, when I watched the press conference, didn't seem super excited about how they hit against JMU, even though, I mean, JMU booted the ball pretty good. But I don't know if you guys watched the game, but, I mean, they outscored them 25-2, so that you are putting, at least some runs on the board, whether or not it was your process that led to those runs being scored. Certainly that's debatable. And as a coach, that's what Jared has to focus on, and can't allow the team to think, oh, we're awesome with hitting the baseball. But Baseball America has the Noles at number 5, Perfect Game number 6, and D1 Baseball number 9. I didn't see any more updates out there, but I know they started the year top 10 as well in the coaches poll. So that is really pretty exciting. Trying to figure out when they come to Orlando, if they do. You see a baseball schedule here. But, I mean, this team is a team that you can get behind. Now, they got a little flair to them, for sure. But a lot of college baseball teams do. Heck, a lot of high school and middle school baseball teams play with a bit of an edge, if you will. So I'm excited to see how they keep playing throughout the year. But I mean, if they can stay healthy, the pitching and the defense, I think, are here to stay. And I think they will continue to try to make quality at bats and see if they can get better and better. They actually do not play at UCF. So I'm going to have to take the boys up to Tallahassee and see them there. It'd be pretty cool. All right, so let's get on here to our next topic. We had a couple people on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Nolecast. And they were asking, do you think FSU can get a good basketball coach? And I think the answer here is a bit complicated. As you probably know, I mean, there's a number of factors concerning this Florida State basketball job. Leonard Hamilton did such an awesome job for such a long time. And this year's team is actually, it's not untalented, and it's not entirely terrible. Now, it's not necessarily moving in the right direction. There's not a lot of reason to believe that they're just, one player away, or just a little bit more gelling in teamwork or cohesiveness or whatever from being that team. And Hamilton, just such an awesome job for such a long time. And I think the sport hasn't so much necessarily passed him by, but much in the same way. And of course, not to the same level of success, but I think maybe in the same way that it eventually kind of passed up Nick Saban. The sport changed around him from more of a, recruiting, relationships, under the table type stuff to just more broadly transactional. I mean, you're still rooting for the players because they wear the laundry that you want to wear, that garnet and gold. But I think that the NIL stuff has certainly changed Hamilton's ability. And well, I think it's changed his effectiveness some. So obviously making the change makes a lot of sense. But interesting name, Luke Laux, who's currently an assistant with the Sacramento Kings. He actually attended the FSU Clemson game a couple days ago. So certainly something to watch out for there. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But I do think you need somebody who generally, if they didn't play at FSU, if they haven't coached at FSU, I think you need somebody who is at least very familiar with the changes of the sport, how FSU has or has not adapted to those changes, understanding the landscape of college basketball now, where the SEC is just spending like crazy in college basketball. I recently did an episode of Cover 3 with Matt Norlander, and I mean, Norlander legitimately listed I'm trying to recall here, but I think it was somewhere on the order of 6 or 7 or maybe 8 SEC teams who could conceivably win the national title. So a lot of the talent is being vacuumed up by the SEC and by their spending. And I think this is where you're starting to see some of the ramifications of that House case go and of the new TV contracts, because you got to spend the money somewhere, because you're really not allowed to show a profit, because, of course, these schools aren't supposed to show profits. So when football is so flush, you got to go ahead and spend it on something else. And the SEC is certainly spending it on basketball. So it's a bit of a different league now and a different situation for FSU than it used to be. And I think you have to have somebody who understands that. I don't know that picking a coach who's like an assistant at a top SEC school who can just go buy whoever they want, I'm not sure that's the right fit for the Noles. And I'm just speaking broadly here because I don't know quite as much about basketball, but I do understand funding and I understand dollars and cents. And from that perspective, I think you got to find a guy who can kind of do a little bit more with less, due to the track record maybe of development, maybe somebody who is good at running a system that can utilize maybe undervalued assets, and specifically by whom, right? Who is undervaluing the assets of the player or the skill that the player has, who might fit your system, but maybe is not a great fit for the system being run by the very top teams. I don't really think that a national title is super relevant. Not relevant. What word am I looking for? Not super realistic, in my opinion, for this FSU basketball program under the current format of the sport. I don't think you can win a natty in Tallahassee in 2025 in basketball because of the spending being done by the other leagues. And of course, because your focus right now is football, 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 as it should be from a business perspective and, of course, from a fan interest perspective. So could Luke Laux make sense? Can he run a system that emphasizes, I don't know, maybe great defense or something like that? Possibly. I don't know what he would run, but at least he's coming from a competitive balance league in the NBA, where there is, and granted, like, I get their super teams somewhat, and certain teams are always better than others, and they circumvent the salary cap some, but at least he's not coming from a franchise that, if he comes, that can afford to just outbid everybody all the time. And so having a coach who has done a good job from an equal competitive talent standpoint, if we think he's done a good job, and obviously if he has interest in the job, I think you'd have to imply that at least your internal evaluations say as much. That could make a lot of sense for the Noles. All right, so next on the list here from our Patreon questions, is the ACC deal and the new playoff format good for the Noles? I already talked about the ACC deal on the show a pretty good bit. If the top teams in terms of TV money and ratings, if those guys are able to get what the SEC is currently getting and soon, then it could be good for FSU. If not, then clearly no. However, the new playoff format is interesting, but not unexpected. I'm not really reading anything unexpected here if you follow what was happening last year, but I know a lot of you don't, and that's why you come to the Nolecast. That's why you ask these Patreon questions. So last year, after the alliance fell apart, the SEC and Big Ten kind of got together and said, hey, like, we're not really going to take our ball and go home right now, but we could. So we need more power to determine the future of the playoff and the future of these postseasons, blah, blah, blah. And the ACC and the Big 12 and those teams don't really have a whole lot of leverage to say no. Of course, the SEC, Big 10, not alliance, but those two, they're supposed to give like due consideration to what the other leagues, the ACC, Big 12, and the G5 conferences want to do, of course. And if you're listening on podcast, I'm winking pretty hard, but I'm sure that they will. If I was going to run it, I would have like the Big 10 propose something and have the SEC him and haw on it before agreeing to it, and not collusion, of course, but that's just kind of what I think you could see. Now, if they're in business, they probably should be using Congruity. Congruity HR Solutions. Matt Lewis does such a great job for all of our Nolecast business. I think we're up to like 10 now who are using Matt, which is fantastic. You can hit him up right there. Link in our show notes. HR, payroll, if you need healthcare hookups, they have that as well. Matt's just exploding with his business, and I think he's helped a lot of our Nolecast related businesses also explode with theirs. So super excited about what Congruity is doing. And maybe the SEC and the Big 10 should give him a call. Maybe the ACC should give him a call so they stop falling further behind. That might be a little bit too big of a business for them, but who knows? I think Matt could be up for the challenge. New format would be, instead of 12 teams, 14 teams, 2 buys. So that would be the SEC and Big 10. And then most likely following more of a straight seeding from the committee, to where we're not giving this weird thing where like Boise gets a higher seed or a higher placement due to the seed stuff. And, we're having like basically all these teams with weird lines. This would just be more of a straight seeding. Like the best teams are probably going to get better draws. And that is ultimately, I think, going to create better games. I modeled it out this year, and this year it would have worked pretty brilliantly. Now, the downside here, I think, or at least it could be a downside, and I'm not really worked up over this because I've known it's coming or likely coming for quite a while. But maybe I should just pretend like it just hit me, and I'll get really pissed off about it. Is that the SEC and Big 10 are likely to get 4 auto bids each. The ACC and Big 12 are likely to get 2 apiece. So that would be 12. The G5 would get 1. If Notre Dame has a team in the top 14, it would get in, or another at-large team would get in. I don't love a couple things about this. One, I think if you're Jim Phillips, you need to be like, dudes, we have 3 teams in our league who legitimately recruit more often than not at a national title level. There's a lot of data out there. There's this thing called the blue chip ratio you could probably go and look at that says, hey, if you don't recruit at this minimum level, you ain't winning the title, dude. It ain't about the transfer portal. It's about signing studs out of high school, developing them, paying up to keep them each year, and winning before they go off to the NFL. So I don't know how in the world the ACC was like, yeah, we'll take 2, and the Big 12 takes 2. Like the Big 12, not from a quality of play standpoint. I want to be clear about this. Not from a quality of play standpoint, but from a ability to produce a team that can actually win the national title, which if that's our national tournament, that I think is a major criteria that should be considered when determining the awarding of auto bids. The Big 12 does not do it. The Big 12 has not had a team win the national title, the current iteration of the Big 12. So not Texas and not Oklahoma, not Nebraska, not Missouri. They have not had a team win the national title in the 85 scholarship era. It just is what it is, man. They don't sign good enough players out of high school to do it. And you could say, hey, bud, FSU doesn't either. Sure, right now, show me FSU's track record over the last 40 years. I guarantee you they're a blue chip ratio team a lot more often than not. And if they have a good year this year, I think there's a chance that their high school recruiting, could maybe get back on track a little bit more. And maybe they get back into that blue chip ratio conversation. I think it's certainly possible. Hell, last year they were lining up to do it fairly well if the season had not completely fallen apart. But that does happen sometimes. It sucks, but it's kind of unavoidable, I guess. Well, I shouldn't say it's unavoidable, but it certainly happens across the sport. So I don't love that personally. I don't love how that works. And it just kind of 4-4. You could tell me like hey, the SEC is always going to have 4 playoff worthy teams. And I don't really have much pushback on that. They certainly always have 4 playoff worthy rosters. That's probably the more accurate statement. Do they always have 4 playoff worthy performing teams? Teams that have 4 playoff worthy resumes? That I doubt, actually. I think most years they do, some years probably not. But they clearly want to take some of the subjectivity out of the committee's hands. And I do too, quite honestly, but we'll see, how that's going to play out. I would have liked to see the SEC and the Big Ten each get 3, and then they could fight over a guaranteed spot, potentially have the committee decide, between that 4th SEC team and the 4th Big Ten team. If you look at this, in the Big Ten, it's basically Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. Occasionally USC, if their act is together. You could tell me Washington, but Washington very rarely, recruits at that crazy high level. Maybe a Wisconsin, a Nebraska, somebody like that. But again, I kind of doubt it. It's possible, but it's not super likely. I would have liked to see that. Now, another implication here is, what do you do about conference championship weekend? Now, this I actually think makes a hell of a lot of sense, because they are running into the problem that the college football season is taking too long. And this does reflect on FSU too. You can't, in like 3 or 4 years, I looked at the future schedules. One of the national title games is on January 24th. That's like an NFL date for a college championship. People are somewhat moving on at that point. That's too long. And you look around and you say, okay, what weekends do we have that we could play with? With an Army-Navy weekend, that's a little bit complicated, but I do think that's something that, a lot of schools could probably, they could encroach on. Do we really need to have an entire weekend that's only Army-Navy? And look, obviously I work for CBS. That's a touchy subject. That's a CBS property. Or maybe you could just give them a designated window to where everybody agrees we will not play at the noon window or the 3:30 window, but you could still play other games on that weekend. Now, what about conference championship weekend? It's not a great use of the calendar and of filling the calendar with inventory if you are going and you're only playing like 7 games on conference championship weekend. That ain't great. It's just not. You should pack that calendar with more games from a TV business perspective. But who are you going to play? What are you going to play? I know it's been floated that the Big Ten might play 3v6 and 4v5 to determine the final 2 slots, whereas teams 1 and 2 are automatically in, so they would not play that weekend. The SEC probably something similar. The ACC, if they only have 2 guaranteed spots, though, how much sense does it make to play your way in? Because if one of your good teams loses in that conference championship game, or what if somebody gets hurt, like a Jordan Travis type situation, when they were already automatically in as a top 2, and again, you only get 2 ACC auto bids, then you're kind of screwing yourself. So I'd be curious to see, what is ESPN's appetite to pick up additional ACC inventory on that weekend. I assume they'd have pretty good appetite to pick up those 2 Big Ten games and those 2 SEC games to determine who gets into the playoff. Maybe not. It's certainly possible that they would not. And there's been some reporting, I think from ESPN, actually, maybe a little from Yahoo with Dellinger, that says that they might perhaps not have a great appetite to pick up those additional games. So, who knows on that? In looking at this, obviously they're getting 58 or 59% of the revenue is going to go to the Big Ten and SEC. That's not great. But again, we already knew about this. If FSU is able to get out of the conference by 2031, I think it's probably fine. If it goes the distance, then I think there could be some pretty serious harm to this Noles program, because those teams are only going to be making more and more money from the college football playoff, which is independent of that ESPN contract. All right, let's get back to this thing. And I do want to tell you, of course, about Madso Township. awesome job of supporting us throughout the years. Matt Thompson does a great job with the For the Table Restaurant Group. They crush. I can't wait to get back up to Madso for FSU camp this summer. It's going to be awesome next time in town as well. Obviously not with the spring game with the construction, but those guys do such a great job. Wings, burgers, the BLT dip is fantastic. So always supporting us, and I hope our listeners continue to support them. Got another Patreon question here. So got asked, hey, you guys on Cover 3 were ranking like the ranking coaches likely to win their first national title, and you didn't mention Mike Norvell. How far down the list is he? And I think for this, we should probably qualify it like at their current school, because otherwise it gets extremely messy in terms of like ranking and projecting where everybody's going to go with their new jobs. So, all right, let's just pull up here a list of Power 5 head coaches, and we will go through this because I've worked on this before the show. And all right, let's go. So, guys that I think are definitely likely to win their first before Norvell. And again, only at their current school. I think with the way they recruit high school, you got to put Cristobal over Norvell for now. Nobody else in the ACC, including Belichick, not at their current schools. The Americans, a big no, not at their current schools. Nobody in the Big 12, of course. Big 10. Sharon Moore, I think you have to put him over Mike right now because the job security seems to be a lot higher, and they also got number one player in the country, Bryce Underwood, the quarterback. So, yeah, that's enough given the uncertain tenure of Norvell in Tallahassee right now. Rule at Nebraska, I'd say probably not. Ryan Day at Ohio State, not eligible because he just won one. Dan Lanning, certainly going to be up there above him. James Franklin. So that's what, 4 guys we've named so far, I think. Barry Odom's a hard no. Shiano. Here's an interesting one. What about Lincoln Riley? Lincoln Riley at USC. Is he more likely to win a national title than Mike Norvell at FSU? I don't really think so, to be honest. But they're probably close, like both. Not necessarily a hot seat, but a bit of a warm seat, I think, with how things have gone so far. And have to work to rebuild that trust in the fan base and in the donors. Washington with Jed Fish, that's a no for me. So I think we're still sitting at 4 above him. Wisconsin's a pretty hard no, of course. Let me see here. That's Conference USA. That's a no. Marcus Freeman, yeah, no doubt. I mean, they just made the national title game. They're recruiting extremely well. So that's 5 above Mike. Mountain West, no. Let me see. SEC, we're going to get a bunch here. DeBoer's a yes, I think. Better track record overall. I mean, his disappointing year in his year 1 at Alabama was like, what, 9-4? Not 2-10. So that's 6 guys ahead of Mike. Hugh Freeze at Auburn. Yeah, I think he's more likely than Mike, although certainly they're both a little bit on a hot seat. So that's 7. Napier at Florida is a definite with Lagway. So that's 8. Kirby's not eligible. Mark Stoops a no. Brian Kelly, I think, has to be above him. So that's what, 9 guys. Mississippi State's a no. Missouri's a hard no. Venables at Oklahoma's a hard no. I think he probably gets fired. Lane Kiffin, yeah. So that'll be 10 right there. Shane Beamer with the Gamecocks, unlikely. Heupel with Tennessee. I think simply because of the job security, yes. So that'd be 11. Sark at Texas, for sure. He's basically on top of everybody's list. That'd be 12. Elko at A&M, yes, because of the resources and because, again, the job security. So that's 13. I mean, again, we just ran through this. And I'm glad that a couple of y'all on the Patreon asked the question, because there's still only like 13, 12, 14 guys who you think are legitimately more likely to still win a national title at the job that they're actually in than Mike Norvell. Even though this team seems so far away from a national title, and I think it is, but you still have good bones. You have a real path, like we talked about in the last segment. I mean, 2 automatic bids for the ACC means you just got to beat basically one of Clemson or Miami out, unless somebody just gets absolutely screwed on the schedule and you got somebody who goes 8-0 in the league. Okay. Like, it feels pretty okay. That's not too bad. got some more stuff here. This is interesting to me, and this will probably be the last segment for today. But I thought this was pretty interesting, and I got this from talking to some folks, and they were like, "Hey, why do you think everybody writes off all of the commits from 24, especially some of the transfers, as lost causes?" And look, the top of that class so far, Cromanhoek's already transferred. Lester just picked up a DUI arrest, right? I mean, you got some guys who I think could contribute, but certainly some of them probably won't at this point. I saw Zach Blostein reported that Kai Dandy's going to move to receiver, which makes a pretty good amount of sense. You got some guys, D.D. Holmes already transferred, back to Maryland, but there's still some names there in the high school ranks who I think probably will play a true role. Now, what about some guys who transferred in last year who still could be good players for you? Like Richie Leonard already played at a fairly high level when he was healthy. But like, how about TJ Ferguson? This one I'm pretty skeptical on. Like a lot of the Bama guys they took last year, I was like, I don't know, man. Like just very, very skeptical. Felt I'm not going to go down that road again. We've done 1,000,001 shows on that topic, but like you look at this. What about Earl Little? Earl Little's a guy who's interesting to me, and I've actually had a couple of people within the program, and this is not like Randy Shannon hyping him up because obviously like there was that family connection. Like these are guys who weren't necessarily around last year. I'm not going to like out who was telling me this, but I've had some dudes hyping up Earl Little quite a bit, and I'm curious to see if that's going to come to fruition. I mean, could he be one of the better safeties on this team? Could he be one of the better safeties in the conference? We talk a lot about the young DBs in this room and how like the law of large numbers says that somebody's likely to emerge, but we can't always point at exactly who is going to emerge. But some people I trust, and I mean, granted, look, they were not correct last year. I was not correct last year. A lot of people were not correct last year, but some people I trust who don't blow smoke about every player were like, hey, I think Earl Little is a guy that you should not give up on yet, So that was interesting. There's also talks to people working on a bit of like a post-mortem thing on the disaster of the season that was 2024. And some of the leadership stuff got brought up. And we talked last year, like you had to end up paying because you don't recruit high school well enough for FSU. You don't recruit high school to that FSU standard. And, I said before, I don't think Mike Norvell held the coaches to a high enough standard in terms of recruiting effort. But you were basically not held hostage, but you did not have a lot of leverage when it came to negotiations with some of your better players who were not good leaders, specifically some of the defensive linemen who were problems or at best just guys who were not good leaders. And I think that's something that is maybe different this year. We'll see. But one thing, and this was not to bash DJU, it's just they said, hey, like if you take DJU and you have a good year, it's probably pretty good because he's somebody that people can kind of, rally behind when things are going well. But because his personality is a little more laid back, like Bud, like he's not somebody who we could count on to really work in terms of being a leader when things were not going well. Like he's not somebody who's a rally the troops type of guy. And I thought that was interesting. So, maybe he's somebody who is better in a better situation, possibly. I think there's, almost definitely if he got better pass protection. Just kind of the post-mortem stuff I'm working on. There's still some interesting pieces on this team. I do expect a pretty significant bounce back for this Noles team if they can stay somewhat healthy this year, because I think there is a good amount of young talent. Not contend for the league, not win the league, probably not be like in serious contention to win the league deep into the schedule, but it's possible you can get a little bit of drama, right? Like that when some of the games fall is at least when the league is rather interesting. If you were somehow able to beat Miami early, which I mean they're expecting Carson Beck to be healthy, but if he's not healthy, you don't think that Miami team with Emory Williams is beatable? Because I do. Pitt, we'll have to see. They lost some important pieces. obviously the finish is a little tough at NC State. NC State fans kind of pushed back on me the other day when I said that they might have missed their window to win. They said, look, we kept a lot of the young players we wanted to keep, kind of had to make some choices between them and Concepcion, the receiver, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator coming in there, to Raleigh. But I mean, some of these games don't appear to be that tough if you return to playing at like a top 35 level, especially if you return to playing at like a top 25 level, which again seems absolutely insane based on how this team played last year. But I don't really think it's completely insane if you look at kind of the totality of the circumstance, right? I think there is a chance that this is a strong bounce back team. Maybe I'm crazy. Who knows? All right. We got about halfway through the topics here. It's good. I don't know how long the show went, maybe 40, 35. I kind of like that adjustable number for the off season. This weekend, I'm going to the Under Armour All-American Camp in Orlando. Next weekend, I'll hit IMG and I'll also hit Miami. After that, we will reconvene with a nice kind of more like big picture recruiting thing. And I think the question that I'm looking to answer is like, how big is this hole that FSU has to dig out of? Are you losing kids to Florida, Miami? Certainly. Are you losing kids to Wisconsin? Are you losing kids to Minnesota? Are you losing kids to like NC State and programs like that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how big is the hole that Mike Norvell and staff have dug for themselves? And I think from there, we'll be able to sort of have more of an honest conversation about digging out of that hole and or if they can at all. So, all right, dudes, please support our sponsors. I think Graham back for the next one, and then I'll do the recruiting one after that. And with that, I'll see y'all later.